The first time he saw her, the rain pinned itself to the windows like 1,000 patient fingertips waiting their turn. The admissions hall smelled of iodine and wet wool, and the city outside groaned under a sky the color of old coins. She stood beneath the triage clock with a posture that dared the world to tell the truth, her face perfect and pale, as if carved from marble, calm, symmetrical, unthreatened by time. He didn't know it yet, but he was arriving at the first mile marker of a road that would fold him in half, then ask him to stand up straight. Dr. Elias Mercer had learned to read fractures in the body and fractures in the soul. One took x-rays, the other took silence. He felt the telltale tug and ache behind the sternum he'd long ago taught himself to ignore, and he stepped toward her with a clipboard and the kind of voice you use for strangers who might be your future or your lesson. Her name on the wristband read Clara Voss, letters sharp as winter. Her pulse was even, her pupils were obedient. Her answers came measured, almost curated, the way a violinist tests an instrument she doesn't fully trust. She said she was fine, only dizzy, only tired, only here because something unnameable had begun to slip. Elias noted the details while the marble face steadied him back, and the moment stretched into a humming line, bright and dangerous. He asked the questions he was trained to ask: onset, duration, family history, and she answered with facts that clicked neatly into place, forming a plausible skeleton with no flesh. He had seen this performance from patients before, the elegant withholding, the immaculate alibi of normalcy. But something in the way she held her jaw felt rehearsed, like a mask that fit a fraction too tightly. By morning, he knew 3 things. First, Clara had a condition that refused to be caught by the routine dragnet. Scans were immaculate, labs behaved, the body declined to confess. Second, she tried to leave without discharge papers, as if the hospital were a room with a lie inside and she couldn't bear to hear it spoken. Third, he didn't want her to leave, and the wanting was not professional. He followed her to the revolving doors with a flimsy pretext about pending labs, and the city's gray breath leaked into the lobby as she paused, that marble face angled like a statue reconsidering its plinth. "If I stay until Friday, will the fog lift?" she asked, not as a plea but as a riddle. Elias heard his own answer arrive from a place he didn't know he had. "If it doesn't, I'll stand inside it with you." On Wednesday, the marble began to thaw. It wasn't dramatic, not the cinematic collapse of an identity. More like a painting slowly changing its colors while no one watched. Her cheekbones softened, the mouth gained a feverish fullness, a tiny scar appeared on her left temple that hadn't been there. He checked the intake photos twice, then a third time, as if evidence could be bullied into consistency. Nurses shrugged, colleagues offered cautious frowns, explanations slithered away. Elias tried to trap the change in notes, but language kept spilling through his fingers. Clara didn't flinch under examination. She looked instead as though she were remembering something and choosing not to say it. When he told her he had no answers yet, her gaze lingered on his wedding band's absent circle, a pale ring of truth he never covered. She said nothing. He said nothing back. The silence between them acquired a temperature. By Friday, the marble girl was gone. In her place was a face he might have passed on a rush hour platform and then looked for again. Warmer, wine-bruised, with a smile that arrived slightly crooked as if it had learned late and fast. She laughed once in the corridor when a porter's cart squealed like a gull, and the sound traveled through Elias like a flare in a night sea. The transformation might have been cosmetic if not for the mind that came with it. Clara's memory for dates blurred, her opinions sharpened, the cadence of her speech changed key. He felt the scandal of it in his bones. This wasn't a symptom, it was a migration. He should have called neurology sooner, maybe psychiatry too, but the custodians of certainty would descend with their nets and he wasn't ready to watch them miss. He told himself he was protecting her, he told himself he was protecting the integrity of the mystery until it could be named. Beneath those noble lies, another one grinned. That night, the hospital's glass corridors turned black and reflective, and he walked her past rooms where sleep fought machines. She spoke about music as if music were a shoreline. She had small, precise hands that moved when she thought, sketching invisible constellations between her words. When she asked about him, Elias offered the approved biography: born in Manchester, trained in London, moved to Copenhagen for the fellowship that never ended, divorced without drama, a man made of hours. She listened as if each sentence were a specimen that might reveal either a cure or a wound. He felt his oldest discipline failing. The part of himself built for controlled distances began to tilt toward heat. On Sunday morning, he found a drawing by her bedside, a series of faces like phases of a moon, each almost touching the next but never quite. Beneath them, in small ink, she'd written, "What if love is a map drawn on water?" The sentence entered him with the hush of a confession. He asked how long this had been happening, and she looked toward the window where the North Sea light makes even sorrow clean. "Since I chose not to be one person anymore," she said, and though the answer was nonsense, it rang like a bell. He pressed gently, and Clara offered him the architecture of her private weather, each Monday a new topology, as if her body were a stage and the week chose the role. Each Friday a door she might not step through. She had learned to pack her life into short distances and soft goodbyes, not because she was fickle but because durable attachments had begun to feel like crimes. He should have recoiled, called for a consult, drew the line between physician and witness. Instead, something reckless and sacred stood up inside him. He visited after rounds with excuses about one more test, one more observation, and together they rehearsed a ritual made of tea and paper cups and unsolved questions. He watched her sleep for exactly one heartbeat too long, then looked away as if caught. When he left the room, he felt lighter and ashamed of feeling lighter. The hospital carried his secret like a cathedral carries echo. At week's end, the discharge papers sat unsigned. He told her to return Monday, and she nodded with the wary joy of a traveler shown a shelter. He wanted to ask which version of her would arrive. He wanted to ask if any of them kept the memory of his voice. He said only that he'd be on call, and she said only that she'd find him. They parted under a sky that had finally made up its mind and opened, rain beating on her hair like punctuation. On Monday, she came back as someone he had never met. The smile was different, contained, almost diplomatic, the eyes an entirely new shade of green, a freckle high on the right cheek that felt like a whispered dare. The chart said Clara Voss. The woman in the doorway said everything and nothing at once. Elias felt his own name loosen inside him. He realized with the steady terror reserved for those who know how to stitch a wound that he had already stepped past the safe edge. He was in love, and love was suddenly a river with 8 currents, each sincere, each contradictory. He wondered which current would recognize him when the week turned. He wondered which version, if any, loved him back. By the second week, Elias began keeping 2 kinds of notes, the ones the hospital required, and the ones he wrote for himself when the halls fell silent. The first set dealt with blood work, neuroimaging, metabolic patterns that refused to explain what was happening. The second set was about her laugh, her handwriting, the way she seemed to relearn him every Monday like someone opening a book they had once loved but couldn't quite remember why. Each version of Clara carried a residue of the last, as if memory were not erased but repainted. The woman who returned that week had freckles like sun-through lace and a small tremor in her left hand when she spoke. She liked the sea. She had never heard of the medical journals he mentioned before. Yet when he handed her tea, she smiled with the same gratitude as the marble girl, and something in his chest answered her in kind. He knew it was unprofessional to test her beyond the approved batteries, but curiosity, once it learned his pulse, became indistinguishable from longing. At night, the hospital dimmed to its after-hours frequency. Machines whispered, monitors breathed, doors clicked like clocks. Elias would walk the observation corridor outside her room. Sometimes she was awake, watching her own reflection as if she expected a stranger to appear. He once asked what she saw, and she answered without turning her head, "Someone who remembers me differently than I remember her." The sentence stayed with him longer than any lab result. When the third Monday came, she changed again, darker hair, sharper tone, and impatience that felt like an echo from a wound. This one challenged him, questioned the tests, called the doctors watchmen of normality. She wanted to see her scans, her chart, the evidence of her difference. Elias tried to explain that nothing in the images justified what he saw with his own eyes, that medicine, for all its triumphs, still kneeled before mystery. She studied him for a long time and said, "Then maybe you're the one changing, not me." He began to dream about her faces overlapping like transparent slides. Sometimes he woke with the phantom sensation of her voice in a language he didn't know but understood. Coffee went cold on his desk. Colleagues started whispering that Mercer was too involved. He didn't deny it, because denial required clarity, and clarity had become a luxury. One evening, he found her in the physical therapy wing, sketching on the paper meant for cognitive tests. Dozens of faces, none identical, but each carrying the same sorrow, the eyes tilted slightly towards something unseen. When he asked which one was real, she handed him the pencil. "You tell me," she said, and the question became an incision he couldn't close. By Thursday, he'd stopped trying to categorize her transformations. He started listening, instead, to the subtle differences in how she pronounced his name, to the stories that never repeated exactly, to the fragments that felt rehearsed in one version and improvised in another. Each woman inside Clara seemed to love him differently, one with curiosity, one with restraint, one with fear. He was falling in love with all of them, or perhaps with the idea that a soul could be plural. The administrators wanted to transfer her to another facility for observation. Elias protested with clinical arguments, but the truth was simpler. He couldn't bear to lose the orbit of her changing gravity. When they overruled him, he went to her room that night. She was awake, hair unbraided, face lit by the blue pulse of the monitor. "They're moving you," he said. She didn't ask where. She just reached for his wrist and whispered, "Then remember the one who stayed." Her grip was light, but it held the weight of a confession. He stayed beside her until dawn, until the hospital stirred with new footsteps and her breathing evened. When he looked again, she was different once more, the freckles gone, the mouth gentler, the same woman and not. He realized then that love, for him, had ceased to be a singular event. It had become a condition, chronic, inexplicable, and resistant to treatment. By the fourth week, Elias no longer trusted mirrors. They had become unreliable witnesses, reflecting whatever version of her the world demanded that day. He stopped shaving before rounds, afraid the reflection might accuse him of falling in love with something that could not exist twice. The hospital remained the same, the mechanical sigh of the ventilators, the polite tyranny of schedules, but inside him, time began to warp. Every Monday felt like a birth, every Sunday a funeral. He tried to document the transformations clinically. He measured, recorded, cross-checked. But medicine thrives on repetition, and Clara refused to repeat. What the body changed, the mind seemed to remember differently each time. Yet she always remembered him, not perfectly, but like a song recalled by a melody rather than words. Some versions said his name with affection, others with the gentle distance of a stranger who has heard about him once, long ago. He told himself that consistency didn't matter, that love could exist in fragments. Still, he found himself aching for recognition, not from the woman she was, but from the woman she had been. The nurses began to talk. One whispered that the patient was cursed. Another, that the doctor was. Elias ignored them, but the rumors hung in the corridors like unwashed curtains. He was summoned by the hospital board, politely warned about professional boundaries. He answered their questions with the calm precision of a man lying for the first time and realizing he is good at it. That night, he went to her room again. She was sitting cross-legged on the bed, sketching faces like constellations. Her new face had a quiet power, darker eyes, a scar above the lip, a maturity that unsettled him. She looked older, as if she had lived through all the others and carried their grief. "Do you know me?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "I know how you look when you're trying not to fall apart." He sat beside her, and for the first time, she reached for his hand, tracing the veins with her fingertips as if mapping a road she meant to travel. When she spoke, her voice was low and unhurried. "Every week, I wake up in a new story. Same room, same world, but a new narrator. Some of them hate hospitals, some love the smell of them. Some remember your face before they even open their eyes. But none of them stay long enough to finish the story." Elias wanted to ask what that meant, but words were clumsy things. He just let her hand rest against his, and the pulse between them became a quiet metronome, measuring everything that could not be charted. On Friday, her test results arrived. Perfectly normal, painfully ordinary. No neurological abnormalities, no autoimmune markers, no hormonal irregularities. Healthy, the report said, as if the word could contain what she was. He felt a rage so cold it almost passed for reason. The truth wasn't in her blood. It was in the way her reflection refused to settle. That evening, he walked her through the garden behind the hospital. The air was thick with salt from the nearby sea, and the lamps hummed like insects. She asked what he saw when he looked at her. He thought for a long time before answering. I see all the people you've been, and the one you haven't become yet. Her expression softened, but there was a sorrow in her eyes he had never seen before. And which one do you love? She asked. He didn't answer, because honesty would have broken both of them. When he returned to his apartment that night, he found her drawings on his desk, dozens of faces, each labeled with a date, and one blank page at the end titled Next Week. His chest tightened. He realized she was preparing for another transformation, maybe the one that wouldn't remember him at all. That Sunday, he sat by her bedside until dawn. The city outside was asleep, the machines slow dancing with the heartbeat of the building. She whispered, "If I disappear, promise me you'll still look for me." He nodded, though he knew he'd already been searching long before she ever changed. When the clock struck midnight, she closed her eyes. And by morning, the woman in the bed was someone new again, same patient number, same file, same room, but no recognition in her eyes. For the first time, Elias didn't introduce himself. He just sat there, quiet, watching her examine her reflection in the window. He wondered how long love could survive without memory. That week began with silence so deep it felt surgical. Clara, or whoever she had become, spoke little, her tone stripped of melody, her sentences cautious and spare. She treated Elias with polite curiosity, like someone trying to memorize a stranger's face at a funeral. For the first time, she asked him to call her by another name. "Elise," she said quietly, as if testing whether the sound itself could protect her from vanishing. Elias wrote it in his notes, though the ink wavered slightly on the page. He told himself it didn't matter what name she used, that his work was to observe, not to belong. But when she said Elise, something in him responded anyway, a quiet ache under the ribs, the body remembering what the mind shouldn't. She spent most of her hours near the mirror, not looking into it, but around it, as though the glass were a threshold. One night, he walked in without knocking. The room was dim except for the faint blue pulse of the monitor, and she stood so close to the mirror that her breath fogged its surface. Her reflection was delayed, a fraction of a second slower than her movement. He felt his stomach drop. "Do you see that?" he asked. She nodded. "It's the only place I'm still all of them." He stepped closer, and for an instant, he saw what she meant. Her reflection shimmered, then split, overlapping faces flickering like candlelight, all bearing traces of her former selves. The marble girl, the freckled one, the woman with the scar. Each staring back as if demanding to be remembered. Elias froze, caught between terror and awe. He reached toward the glass, and all the faces blinked in unison before settling into one, Elise, calm and watching him. The next day, he was summoned again. The board demanded her transfer. "It's psychosomatic," said one physician, "or self-inflicted. Dissociative identity, maybe." Elias listened in silence, his jaw set. He knew the language of containment, the medical vocabulary that reduces miracles to malfunctions. When they finished, he signed the report with a hand that no longer believed in the authority of ink. That night, he told her, she didn't react, not with fear or anger, only resignation. "They think I'm sick because I don't stay the same," she said. "But what if that's the only healthy thing left in me?" Elias wanted to tell her she was right, that constancy was overrated, that even hearts change rhythm to stay alive. Instead, he said nothing, because words would have made the truth smaller. On Friday, he came to her room after rounds and found her drawing again. Only this time, there was no face on the paper, just a series of mirrored silhouettes, each fading into the next. "What is it?" he asked. "It's what you look like when you're trying not to lose me," she said softly. He sat beside her, his throat tight, his pulse loud. "If I remember you," he said, "does that keep you from disappearing?" She looked at him then, really looked, her eyes steady and endless. "No," she whispered, "but it keeps me from vanishing completely." The air between them was electric, not romantic, not lustful, but sacred, as if some invisible thread had decided to tie itself between their lives. He realized, with the clarity that only despair brings, that he would spend the rest of his days searching for her reflection in every stranger he met. That weekend, he didn't go home. He stayed in her room as she slept, watching the subtle shifts of her face under the monitor's glow. Around midnight, she stirred, her features softening, rearranging again. He leaned forward, breath held, as if witnessing a sunrise from too close. When she opened her eyes, There was no recognition, only the calm curiosity of someone meeting him for the first time. Elias felt the ground tilt beneath him. All the names he had for her, Clara, Elise, the marble girl, dissolved into the same truth. He loved a woman who could never stay. And yet, he stayed anyway. The 5th week arrived like a wound reopening in slow motion. Elias had stopped pretending that he was studying her. He was mourning her, again and again, in cycles disguised as observation. Every Monday brought a stranger who looked at him with the same eyes but a different soul, and every Sunday took her away like the tide retreating with everything it had borrowed. The woman who came this time was delicate, almost translucent, as if she had been sculpted from moonlight. She spoke softly, choosing her words with the care of someone who knew they might dissolve at any moment. She had no memory of the others, no drawings, no sketches, no reflections. When he mentioned the name Clara, she frowned faintly. "I think I used to know her," she said, "but she's quieter now." He felt pressure in his chest that medicine had no code for. He'd seen grief in patients before, grief as chemical imbalance, grief as pathology, but this was something else. This was love metastasized. He began to search for a pattern that might explain the unexplainable. Sleep cycles, hormone levels, neurological feedback loops, moon phases, anything that could be charted. But every dataset curved back toward chaos, and every morning he awoke to find the woman in her bed one face further from the one he'd loved before. He started recording her voice during interviews, then replaying the tapes late at night, hoping to find continuity in tone or rhythm. The recordings became a choir of strangers speaking in the same pitch of loneliness. Sometimes, she would look at him, as if sensing the sorrow he tried to hide behind professional calm. "You keep looking at me like you've lost something," she said once. He answered, "Maybe I have." She nodded, then turned toward the window. "Maybe I have too." On Thursday, something changed. During her evening check, she paused mid-sentence, eyes wide as if she had stepped into a room she'd seen before. "You were here," she whispered. "Before all this." His pulse spiked. "You remember?" She blinked, confused. "No, not exactly, but I think my heart does." The line hit him harder than any diagnosis he'd ever written. He stayed late that night, long after visiting hours. She drifted in and out of sleep, murmuring fragments, names, places, half-formed memories that didn't belong to her current self but to the ghost she'd been. He wrote every word down, desperate to build a map through her changing interior. Somewhere between 3 and 4 a.m., she stirred again and said something that made his hands tremble. "Don't let them make me forget you." He wanted to promise her that he wouldn't, but promises meant permanence, and permanence had become a myth. "Instead," he said, "then remember this," and reached out, brushing his thumb across her cheek. Her skin was warm, her pulse steady, her breath slow, details he memorized the way survivors memorize exits. The next morning, she was gone. The bed was remade, the room reassigned. The transfer order had been signed while he slept at his desk. The file read Clara Voss, relocation for advanced observation. Elias felt the world narrow into a single, unbearable sentence. He hadn't said goodbye. He drove to the transfer wing, demanding answers, but the staff claimed there was no record of her arrival. No patient named Clara, no alias Elise, no trace in the logs. It was as if she had never existed. The absence felt surgical, too clean, too deliberate. That night, he returned to her old room. The lights were off, the walls bare, but the mirror remained. And there, faintly in the reflection, he saw it, not her face exactly, but a flicker, like the residue of light after someone has left the room. He reached out instinctively, his fingers brushing cold glass. The reflection rippled once, then stilled. He stood there for a long time, until the dawn crept into the corridor, thinking about her words, "Don't let them make me forget you." And in that moment, Elias realized he wasn't the one who needed to remember her. It was the world that had forgotten her first. The 6th week unfolded like a fever dream. The hospital moved on, patients came and went, diagnoses stacked neatly on clipboards, but Elias walked through its corridors as though trapped between two realities. Every face he passed seemed half familiar. Every sound carried a ghost of her laughter. He began to question the architecture itself, wondering if the walls had kept her secret better than he could. He tried to find proof that she had ever existed, old admission records, digital backups, security footage, but the system responded like a body rejecting an organ. Files corrupted, cameras offline, even her handwriting had vanished from his drawer, as if the paper had chosen to forget to. The only evidence left was the space she'd occupied, room 213, and the faint scent of her soap that refused to fade. Elias started to dream of her again. In those dreams, she stood by the mirror, calling his name from across the glass. Sometimes her face flickered through all its forms at once: Clara, Elise, the freckled one, the scarred one, each whispering the same question. If I come back, will you recognize me? He always woke before he could answer. He began to wander the hospital at night, unable to sleep. The building at that hour was a cathedral of machines, the hum of oxygen and the rhythm of monitors forming a kind of mechanical heartbeat. Once, passing the neurology wing, he caught a glimpse of someone through the glass, a woman sitting alone, her posture too familiar to ignore. He pushed open the door, breath unsteady, but when she turned, the face was different again. New hair, new eyes, a faint tremor in the lips that almost formed his name. Clara, he whispered. She frowned, uncertain. Who's that? He stepped closer. You don't remember me. Her confusion softened into apology. I'm sorry. Should I? The words struck him harder than anger could have. He stared at her, the way someone stares at a photograph that refuses to age. No, he murmured, I suppose not. But when she smiled, shy, hesitant, unfamiliar, he saw it again. The flicker, the same fragile warmth he'd fallen for, reassembled in a new pattern. Over the next few days, he visited her discreetly, under the pretense of consultation. She was registered under another name, Myra Kessler, with no past medical records. But her pulse, her voice, her quiet fascination with reflections, they were hers. He told himself it was impossible, that he was chasing shadows of grief. Yet when she laughed, the sound cut through him with the precision of déjà vu. One evening, she caught him watching her reflection. Do you believe in parallel lives, doctor? She asked. He hesitated. I used to believe in stable ones. She smiled sadly. Then you've already lost faith. He should have walked away then, should have handed her file to someone unburdened by memory. But love, once it learns the pattern of loss, keeps repeating itself like a reflex. He stayed. The following night, the hospital lost power for 47 seconds. When the emergency lights blinked back on, her room was empty. Her bed untouched, the sheets cold. No record of discharge, no witnesses. The staff assumed he was mistaken, no patient by that name, Dr. Mercer, but he knew what he'd seen. He returned to room 213, desperate, delirious. The mirror still hung there, untouched. And this time, when he leaned close, he didn't see his reflection. He saw her. Not as she was, but as all of them, every face, every version, staring back with the kind of stillness that only truth allows. He whispered, Clara, and in the reflection, her lips moved, soundless, yet certain, I remember you. The glass shivered once, then cleared. His own reflection returned, alone. Elias sank to the floor, shaking, his palms cold. Somewhere deep inside the hospital's hum, a faint voice echoed his name, stretched thin, fading but not gone. He realized then that maybe she had never vanished at all. Maybe she had only moved to the other side of the glass. After that night, Elias was no longer entirely sure which world he belonged to. He went through the motions, ward rounds, consults, polite small talk in the cafeteria, but his mind stayed in room 213, orbiting that mirror like a planet refusing to leave its dying star. Sleep offered no peace. Each dream began the same way. The hospital drowned in a low blue glow, rain whispering against the windows, and her voice calling his name from somewhere just beyond the reflection. He'd move toward the sound, and the mirror would pulse like a heartbeat, one steady, one fractured, until the glass dissolved into water. Sometimes he crossed it, sometimes he woke before he could. Colleagues started to notice the tremor in his hands, the hollow around his eyes. You need rest, they said. He smiled the way people do when rest has become an impossible luxury. One night, he returned to her old room and found the mirror covered with a white sheet. Renovation, said the nurse. But Elias knew better. Hospitals don't renovate grief, they just rename it. He waited until everyone left and locked the door behind him. The sheet came down with a whisper, revealing the same piece of glass that had rewritten his understanding of the possible. It looked ordinary now, just a mirror, yet something in its stillness hummed. He stood there for a long time, studying his reflection. The man staring back looked older and done, as if the months of chasing her through faces and weeks had left fingerprints on his soul. He reached out and touched the surface, cold, real. And then, slowly, impossibly, it began to move. The ripples came like breath on water, and behind the distortion, a shape emerged, her shape. She looked exactly as she had the first time he met her, the marble girl under hospital light. Only now her eyes were softer, carrying the memory of all the lives that had passed between them. He didn't speak. He couldn't. The air was too heavy with the weight of recognition. Finally, her voice reached him, not from the glass but through it, like sound filtered through a dream. "You kept your promise," she said. Ilias's throat closed. "I tried," he whispered. She smiled, the same half-smile that used to undo him, and placed her palm against the glass. He mirrored the gesture, their hands separated by a few millimeters of impossible distance. "I thought I lost you," he said. "You can't lose what you remember," she answered. He felt tears rise, unexpected, hot. "Then why do I still feel like I'm forgetting?" Her reflection shimmered. "Because you're still alive." The lights in the corridor flickered, thunder rolled somewhere far away, and for a brief second, the glass grew warm under his hand, as if whatever divided them had turned to air. Her image leaned closer, the outline blurring, her breath fogging the other side. He thought she would vanish again. But instead, she whispered one last time, almost tenderly, "If I change again, find me." Then the glass stilled, her face dissolving into his own reflection. The room fell silent except for his breathing. Elias remained there until dawn, the first light of morning catching the corner of the mirror like a pulse. And for a moment, he thought he saw her silhouette reflected behind him, just a hint, a soft echo of a woman who refused to be forgotten. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. Because somewhere between reality and memory, between science and longing, he finally understood. Some people don't stay to be loved, they stay to be remembered. Weeks passed, and the hospital forgot him too. Dr. Elias Mercer took an indefinite leave, a clinical euphemism for collapse. His office was cleared, his badge deactivated, his patients reassigned. The whispers said he'd lost his mind over a woman who never existed. The official record called it compassion fatigue. But those who saw him walking along the coast in the evenings, coat unbuttoned against the wind, said he looked like a man waiting for someone who might arrive by tide. He rented a small flat near the sea, a place where silence had room to breathe. There were no mirrors inside, except one, a rectangular shard he'd salvaged from the hospital during its renovation. It hung above his desk now, plain and unremarkable. Most days, he avoided it. But on nights when the rain returned, he found himself sitting across from it, tea cooling beside him, heart steady but expectant. He spoke to her sometimes, not aloud, but in that private language born from shared absence. He told her about the patients he still dreamed of treating, about the research he never finished, about how memory can become both home and prison. He told her he forgave her for leaving, though he knew she never truly did. And then, one night, as thunder stitched itself across the horizon, he noticed the glass tremble. A soft ripple, like breath. He leaned closer, pulse quickening, not with fear, but with something older, gentler. The reflection wasn't his anymore. It was hers. Not fractured, not flickering, whole. She looked exactly as he remembered from that first day. Calm, luminous, eyes filled with the kind of knowing that transcends explanation. But there was something new to stillness, peace. "You found me," she said, voice quiet but clear, as if carried by the wind between worlds. He smiled through the tears he didn't bother to hide. "I never stopped looking." She tilted her head, studying him. "You've changed." "So have you," he said. "But this time, you stayed." For a heartbeat, the rain stopped. The sea outside fell silent. The air in the room thickened, and the light from the window stretched until it met the mirror's surface. And in that thin margin between reflection and reality, Elias saw it, not a ghost, not a hallucination, but a meeting. The doctor and the woman, side by side, neither bound by time nor separated by glass. He reached out one last time. The mirror warmed beneath his touch, and for a moment that could have lasted a second or a century, the world forgot to divide them. When the light dimmed, the mirror held only one face, hers, peaceful, still, eternal. Days later, when the landlord came to check the flat, he found the kettle cold, the lights off, and the mirror gleaming faintly in the dark. 2 sets of fingerprints marked the glass, one fading, one clear. No one ever learned what became of Elias Mercer. But every so often, during storms, neighbors swore they saw 2 shadows through the window, a man and a woman standing close, their outlines merging in the reflection. And if you looked long enough, you could swear she was smiling, as though, after all the weeks, all the faces, all the searching, she had finally found the one who remembered her exactly as she wished to be.